I'm here today with David Goddard, and we're going to discuss spiritual ecology, which is a subject very close to my heart. I think the environment's an important place, and recently there's been a lot in the news about the environment, what with Extinction Rebellion and places like that. But it's not just about being green and throwing away our plastic or not using plastic. There's a lot more to spiritual ecology than that. So, David, if you would like to tell us more.
Well, I'd like to see how I got into this, and then what I'm trying to do to contribute to this. So, in the 1960s, during my childhood, national television in the UK began to show wonderful programmes about the natural world and its wildlife. We all became fascinated with Africa and the great migrations of gnus and zebras and antelopes. We had our first glimpses of the vast oceans of whales and dolphins and the super-abundant life of the deep. From our couches we saw the Americas with their mountains and forests, their plains full of buffalo. Visually we journeyed through the jungles of the Amazon and over the high Andes. For the very first time, ordinary folk in the cities of Europe were shown the wonders of the natural world. My mother also instilled an empathy for nature in me. She always had a great deep sense of nature, partly due to her Romany, to her gypsy heritage, and to being brought up in the countryside. I remember her telling me how in her teens she used to cycle to the great stone circle of Stonehenge. It wasn't fenced off in those days. She would have a packed lunch and her favourite books, and she would read while seated leaning against one of the standing monoliths. A little further out, apparently there was her favourite place, a bluebell wood that she would visit every spring. Later, when she moved to London, she loved to go to Kew Gardens in springtime to see the glades of bluebell flowers by Queen Charlotte's Cottage, which years later I learned that bluebells have a special association with the fairy folk. This seeded in me an appreciation for and a resonance with nature. But it was later on that I became acquainted with its inner side. I had read some theosophical writers in my teens, and in England there was a theosophical estate called Teckles Park near the town of Camberley. This, like many other theosophical estates, had been purchased for the purpose of creating a conducive place for theosophists to build their homes in, living with neighbours of like-minded philosophy. There were other organisations closely associated with theosophy. There was Co-Freemasonry and the Liberal Catholic Church. Both of these sister organisations had a building in Teckles Park. The Liberal Catholic Church building was dedicated to St. Francis. You may not know, but St. Francis is regarded as one of the great patrons of nature, because he would praise the divine in Brother Sun and Sister Moon, and in the animals, and praise Sister Water for her purity, and so he's become a kind of patron of all those things. He had this sense of panentheism, the insight of the divine dwelling within nature. Because Teckles Park had been lived in for nearly a century by people for whom the nature spirits were part of their theosophical philosophy, this had an effect upon the atmosphere. Even if most were unable to perceive the fae folk, nevertheless there were also seers for whom the veil was thin. Teckles Park had many rhododendron bushes in it. Rhododendrons originally came from the foothills of the Himalayas. That's where the plant originates. There are also a few sequoia trees, giant redwoods, planted there too. On Sunday evenings during summer, the Liberal Catholics used to hold a religious ceremony in which they would process the Blessed Sacrament through the grounds of the park. An outdoor altar was set up, and there the procession would pause, so that a solemn blessing could be directed over the entire park to all of its inhabitants, both visible and invisible. As a consequence, the nature spirits of Teckles Park were very friendly. They were well disposed to those who mentally embraced them. It was here that my own seership was awoken and developed. Then, travelling over the years, I've had many opportunities for its use. I've been to Europe, Africa, and many times the United States, perceiving the nature spirits. I've engaged with the dryads, the devas, and the great angels of nature, both at work and play. I have worked with fellow seers from Native American communities in Colorado, Montana and Arizona, exchanging traditional lore, discovering how much we have in common. I highly recommend to anybody interested in these things a book by one of the great theosophical clairvoyants, a man called Jeffrey Hodgson. He wrote many books on these subjects, but in particular his book, The Kingdom of the Gods, is a monumental work. It contains coloured plates painted by an artist to whom Hodgson described what he saw with his inner vision. These are the best artistic representations I've ever seen of the true forms of the angels and of the denizens of fairy. The only thing to bear in mind is that the artist has used pastel shades, whereas the actual reality is that of incandescent colours and brilliant light. Looking at the pictures, you can see the bands of energy and their energetic radiations. You can see how what anthropomorphic images portray as wings on angels is really the angel's aura, as it both receives and distributes cosmic vibration. I highly recommend The Kingdom of the Gods to anybody who's seriously about this kind of work. The text is good too. Hodgson became very interested in Kabbalah towards the end of his life, and he incorporates what he learnt about that in the same book. As an aside, it was 3 months ago, I was in Los Angeles, and at the Theosophical headquarters there, called Besant Lodge, there are some windows painted with images from the Kingdom of the Gods. So they're very good, and they're actually pictures of the angels who presided over certain mountains in South Africa.
And you were saying they're like stained glass?
Yes.
Yes, stained glass windows.
Painted with like glass paint. Fascinating things. The reason I'm bringing all this to people's attention now is we are all aware of the ecological crisis that our planet faces. Only today I heard yesterday that they were saying that Canada is now twice as hot as ever before, and yet we've always thought of Canada as the great bastion of natural things, but in fact there's huge troubles going on. And then today I heard that now they're saying that the Himalayas is 3 times as hot as ever before. And that's critical because most of Asia depends upon the Himalayan glaciers for its fresh water. The Yangtze River, the Brahmaputra, the Ganges, they all come from the Himalayan tableland. And as that's being, corrupted and things, so it also feeds the biggest weather pattern in the country. It's the flood from the Himalayas. As the cold air comes down through the river gorge to the side, that's what creates the hot steam that then creates the monsoon. And it's the monsoon that feeds all of Asia and sub-Asian areas. So it's a critical thing. So over 30 years of travel, I've often gone backwards and forwards to the USA, and I have frequently flown over Greenland. I recall when I first saw Greenland, it looked like films of the North Pole, solid ice and snow as far as the eye could see. Nowadays my eyes shed tears when I look down at it. It looks like a pond with some icebergs floating in it. Anybody who doubts that global warming is a fact should fly over Greenland. It is good that people are being made aware of this and that governments and communities are doing what they can do. If not to be able to reverse it, at least to try and halt the tide. At the time we're now talking about this, the UK government, for a change, has been one of the first to declare the peril facing our planet is no longer just a crisis, it's a full-on emergency. Of course, if the politicians stopped speaking, there'd be less hot air.
Very good.
So what can we spiritual practitioners do? Well, we have a unique contribution to make, I feel. One that nobody else can. And I'll try and explain that. It's well known in our kind of work that whatever emotion drives a magical activity, it will colour it with its own distinct energy. So when it comes to information now about the state of the planet, a lot of the work people do is essentially promoted, coloured by fear. Fear of what's going to happen to the planet and its creatures, fear for the future of humanity. Will there be a world worth living in or able to sustain life at all? The trouble with this energy of fear, as any occultist knows, is that if you fear something strongly enough, you attract it. You attract the very thing you're fearful of. This kind of emotional magnetism, by the way, is also recognised in psychological circles as well. This is why I'm really doing what I can about this and about talking about nature spirits now, because when we communicate with nature spirits, and by the way, it's not always the astral equivalent of sight. It doesn't have to be seeing. There are other sensitivities of the soul. Some people feel the nature spirits or hear them. There are various kinds of clairsentience. Having the subtle senses awoken doubles our appreciation of life, because then we experience both the astral and the physical aspects of beauty and wonder. Anybody who's experienced nature spirits knows beyond all doubt of the vitality, the verve, the inherent joy that they bring and that they are. If you've had the privilege of communing with them, they will become your friends. They will help you to experience the great web of life in which all beings are one family. Not just human or animal family, but the multi-layered family made up of both the visibles and the invisibles. Then, for such a person with these sensitivities and who's made these relationships, issues become ensouled by a different emotion, not by fear. They will be fueled by love and care, because nature is overflowing with intelligent beings too, not blind forces, but beings who also want to cooperate with us. And so it becomes a cooperation between different orders of evolution, different orders of being that are bound together by mutual affection. When ecological work is done from this basis, its emotional signature is very different. It's hope-filled, it's light-filled, it reflects and directs the universal life force itself. And that's why, as you know, Debbie, this September I'm working at Hawkwood, which is a place I've worked in for many years now, again with lots of old land, and I know the nature spirits there very well. There's even an elven enclave there, which are quite rare nowadays. And I'm conducting a 5-day residential workshop, which I'm calling Restoring Eden. And my purpose is to teach people how to communicate with the nature spirits and the elves and the elemental spirits of earth, air, fire and water, and the great angels who serve God made manifest in nature.
And if someone wanted to come on that course,
Yep.
How would they get in touch? Would it be through your website, Rising Phoenix Foundation?
No, they would get in touch with Hawkwood, because they're managing all the arrangements. Mm-hmm. Already we've got some bookings. There's some people from America and from Ireland, but there's people from Spain and from other places. But there's still some places left. Have you ever been to Hawkwood yourself?
No.
It's a lovely place. It's actually it's an old place. It's one of the last natural hills before you come down to the Bristol Channel, and on a clear day you can see right the way across to you see the mountains of Wales. And so you can see the lines as they flow down like a cup, flowing down the energy both to and from it. And the site was originally a Celtic temple, and then later on a small Roman fort, because to this day it has its own sacred well. You'll see people all day long from the villages come just to fill up their canisters. It's at the foot of this huge tree. And there are some redwoods on the ground too. And then after that it then became a monastic possession. Remember, in the Middle Ages, monasteries owned large amounts of land. And there's a special name for it. I'm trying to remember it. I think it's a grange, I think. But basically is when the monasteries became large landowners, well, apart from, let's say, the Abbey, which is where everything focused, they would build these small little stone monastic houses that would have about 6 to 8 monks spread all over their lands, because their purpose was to collect the rents, but also to minister sacramentally to the people. And so a group of, say, 6 or 8 monks would be sent, for 3 months. They'd be out there, then they go back to the mother house, and another group would go, and that's how the whole thing went on till Henry VIII did something that Mao Zedong copied with Tibet later on, destroying monasteries. Then what Henry did was, of course, to sell off the land and then the buildings, because he was always broke. And so a so-called noble family, got it and things. And I'm always reminded of something. Apparently, it's said that the Comte de Saint-Germain once said to somebody when they were flattering him on being titled, he said, "It's nothing to be proud of. The difference between, if you come from a so-called aristocratic family, it simply meant that your ancestors stole cattle and managed to hang on to them." And if you look at history, he's actually quite right. It is the basis of it. Anyway, so Hawk was a really special place, and the nature spirits are like very, very tame there. I've been working there now for, 1990s I started working in there, and Gareth Knight did some work there and things, and so the nature spirits are very used to us and things. So it's such a precious opportunity to be able to teach people, because it's like anything else, you couldn't dump me in a strange place and expect me, because I'd be spending the first 3 weeks making my own contacts with the beings in the area. It's the same going anywhere. So you have to go to a place where you're already known and things. And also, it's not just about, communing and things. There's also like the sacred myths and stories, gentle, all-inclusive rituals, sacred chants, and some drumming and dance work and things. And also the place is lovely. I mean, as I say, I've been there for years, so I know the staff very well. They cater for all kinds of dietary needs, and things. So it's a great place to be.
Well, it's going to be a fantastic course to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it starts on Monday the 2nd and finishes on the Friday, which I think is the 6th, I think. Yeah. Okay,
and hopefully there'll be many more like it. Can I just ask, do you think, the nature spirits that you're talking about, they want to commune with us, don't they? It's us that's lost the contact with them.
Oh, certainly. Now, elves are a different ballgame. Elves are crashing snobs. They really are. I mean, in the old days, even now, I think, in some of the Scottish and Irish things, they still call them the gentry, like gentlemen.
Yes. But
because they're always kind of like, snobby kind of thing. The elves are the hardest ones to contact, and that's why it's the other reason I favour Hawkwood, because elves never ever set foot into industrialised land. Because for them iron is death, they won't go to any place, and so our cities with all the steel and everything is like anathema. And it's rare to have them that close to human dwellings. That's why, in fact, most of my early stuff with elves, because they're very distinct, because they're very rarely anywhere near where humans live, was mainly in America, in Montana, and the huge land masses, because the land was still free and uncontaminated and that kind of thing. But strangely enough, Hawkwood is one of the exceptions. It's because it was first a temple, then monastic, then, I didn't tell you, the family who got it off Henry, one of their descendants followed Rudolf Steiner and gave it to the anthroposophists thing. Then it became a place for adult education with an emphasis upon the art and spirituality. So there's still a kind of ambience, and even the staff there, the way they look after the place, I don't know all the names, but they have like special systems for recycling water, waste matter, you know, all these non-invasive things, and the plants are spontaneous and things. And the nature spirits nature spirits, you see, they'll flirt with anybody because they're just lovely. I mean, I suppose I have to give the sense of, I'm not talking really about like conversations in that sense. No, it's true, with elves you can have conversations. Why is another matter, but you can have conversations with them. But nature spirits, when I talk about communing things, it's not like a conversation with words. They're really like, and I'm just telling you, just saying it as it is, they're really like very intelligent cats or a pet dog. It's more like you share emotions more than anything else. And as they get used to you, then they can also pick up pictures, ideas you have, or send you ideas, pictures and things. And as you get to know each other better, then of course, like anything else, communication kind of increases. But their point isn't that they want to chat. They want to help you. I mean, what they love is, I mean, like, let's say let's deal with one of the smallest of the lots, like a flower fairy, you know. And say it was like a fairy looking after a rose bush and things. Nothing blisses out this rose fairy than you appreciating its plant. It just adores it, you know. And of course it then knows more as a spiritual reality about what a rose is and all that kind of thing. And so we learn from it that way. And most of nature spirit communication is spent of actually, as they open up hidden wonders of the natural kingdom around us, the subtle senses of it and things. The great devas, the great angels of nature, now they're a different ballgame. I mean, then communication is like truly spiritual, but for them, we're the intelligent cats and dogs, because they can have conversations with, like, you know, hundreds of beings at one time. Well, they're angels, so I mean it's a different ball game. But their communication is like very rapid, but they can really open up. So I mean, you know, like you see, say, an angel of a mountain, for example, and of course they're colossal, but and you can say, well, after a while you could say, well, okay, so it's a mountain and things, so what? But I mean, that angel can tell you and show you how that mountain came into being, the effect it has on the tectonic plate that floats in the magma, the effect it has on the weather patterns over the face of the earth, how it's aware of every single creature, every bird having a nest or every beehive on the mountain itself. I mean, it's like a huge ecosystem, and yet also has a global dynamic, which are the things we're only just beginning to grasp, aren't we? Of the ecological crisis, is that nothing is separate from anything else. Everything touches everything else, and that's why this is so important, because they live that. That is their way.
Because this is a system, and if we take one part out of the system, then the whole of the rest of the system will start to fall, won't it?
Absolutely.
So they must be very concerned about what's happening.
Well, it's an interesting point. I mean, I don't mean to like throw cold water on it, because you see, again, we're coming back to the human idea of fear. Even the most basic nature spirit has no idea what you mean when you try to indicate death. For them, the death of a plant is part of its cycle. You know,
yeah, it's going back into the ground.
Going back, you know, or it dies entirely. Some plants die entirely, don't they? And they only live through their seed that comes. So they kind of expect it. It's the same like with angels. Although angels, I'm not dealing with nature angels now, but like other angels, they can see, say, a human being, you know, and we would know the human is grieving from the death of a loved one. That's not the way it is for an angel who wouldn't understand that. It knows that the person's upset because it sees how grey and gunky its aura is. But if you would try to explain to it that, you know, you're sad because so-and-so died, they'd be saying to you, what's death? And you'd say, like, you know, the body, and they said, so they've changed their wetware.
Because they believe it still carries on
Well,
the
for
next
them,
whatever
for
it
them,
is. Yes.
they don't believe, they know.
They,
But you see what I mean? There's,
yes.
there's the kind of issue. But that's also, now you can see why angels as messengers were probably the first instructors in what now later on we codify as religion. When you think about it, most of the scriptures are full of angelic visitation, you know, bringing pieces of information or saying, or giving warnings in dreams, or saying an important soul's going to come, or whatever. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So this is why it's so important, because basically for all of our cleverness and sophistication on our iPhones, we've become so materialistic. So, I mean, even to the point where, you know, for most of us, even just living in cities, which is so out of touch with what it is to walk in nature and things. So to be with these beings for who are like living dynamic light bulbs of it, you know, it's so uplifting and empowering for us. And bear in mind, this has been done before in certain ways. Most people will know about Findhorn. Do you think it's unnecessary for me to explain it briefly?
No, I think most people know what Findhorn is. The community that's...
Well, and you know, it was barren land, and then they put some land aside for the nature spirits and the angels of nature, and said, this is for you. Mm-hmm. And then within decades, the place flourishes and the rest of it. Well, it's not unique in this sense. I've been to Hausen in the Netherlands, which was another theosophical state. It was a twin to Teckles Park. And it was originally very, very sandy. It was reclaimed land from the Zuiderzee, or whatever it's called. You know. And they did the same thing there. And when I went there 30 years later, it was verdant and green and trees and all the rest of them things. I mean, to English people in Britain, you may have noticed, if you've ever done a train ride to the country, if you never wondered when you go past all these fields of crops, remember there's nothing sentimental about farmers. You know, farmers who keep, you know, cattle aren't animal lovers. They're keeping food. Yeah,
it's a job to them.
Yeah. So you should wonder why in these fields where every little space is worth money, you will see clumps of trees in the middle of the field of crop, when some canny farmer would actually have chopped them down to get just a bit more yield out of the field.
Yes.
It's because in the old days these were the grows, the copses were given to the gentry, to the fair folk. So, because they are the, you see, here's the thing about elves is, they are the numinous, they are the spirits of vitality, they give life to the land. In fact, under Scottish law, the deeds for selling agricultural land has a footnote in which the signee, you know, the signatory, the buyer, says they will not cut down the trees put aside for the gentry.
Oh, that's fascinating, because I often see that. I often look at them and when, like say, on a train journey, or where I lived in Wales, it was often you'd go through the fields and there'd be like one little circle of trees in the middle of the field.
Yeah, exactly. It's very odd when you think about it from an economic point of view. It's only because we grew up with it, we take it as normal. But when you step aside of it, like you've been to places in America where there's like 1,000 acres of just plain wheat, and everything else has been squashed out. You know.
So they don't have that rule out there, or have not considered that.
No.
Oh.
No. So that's where the importance of them come from. And so this is why they are able. I mean, in my angel book, there's a chapter in there on the angels of nature, and I talk about briefly on what I've just done about Hausen and Teckles Park and Findhorn. And I've also said, put aside some of your garden, don't make it into a flower bed, put it aside, you know, till it so it's fertile, and just get packets of seed of wild plants and just put those in there, and as long as you moisten it and things, because not only does that work good ecologically for indigenous species of insects and butterflies and birds and things, but also for the natural thing. And also I give there the way you can make offerings to the nature spirits at each full moon. So then, even though you can say, well, it's that sprawling metropolis, well, you know, parts of London, like here, you flew above it, how much of that is green garden? Quite a lot.
Yes, in this city we're very lucky that we still have things like that.
And therefore, if we have the know-how and the determination, we won't get elves to come and move in, but nature spirits can adore the place. You can get nature spirits into a garden, flower box.
Which many people I've been noticing have been doing more and more of that as well. I've actually came back from Armenia last year, and I noticed that their cities, when we flew over, it was heartbreaking seeing it was just industry and houses and shops, no parks. And they said to me that how lucky we were that we had things like Regent's Park and all the other parks in this big city. And we are very lucky that we still have streets with trees in.
Oh yes, yes. It's one of the advantages, I mean, of it's like a backhanded advantage of, you know, having had a royal family. Thank God it's constitutional now, not absolute, but I mean, because the big parks had belonged to the Crown.
The royal parks.
At Hyde Park, Queen Victoria opened up to the public. Before all of her ancestors, it was private, you know. And do you know about the Queen's canopy of trees?
I do, yeah, I do. What do you want to remind us?
Well, it's just as a fascinating thing, is when the Queen was having, I think, her 90th birthday, she's head of the Commonwealth, which is the largest gathering of nations after the UN. I hadn't realised that it's not automatic that the British sovereign is head of the Commonwealth.
No, it's not.
It's elected, but it was her father who turned the British Empire into a Commonwealth of nations who had each other's backs and looked after each other and that kind of thing. And so, you know, as is traditional, they asked her what she'd like, and she said, I mean, what do you buy the Queen of England? I mean, you know, a castle.
I've got free.
Anyway, what she asked for was that they would put aside some forested land in perpetuity. I mean, Canada gave across something like 50,000 acres. Now countries who aren't even in it. She wants these trees, and as she says, she's planted more trees than most people, which when you think about it, is actually true. And I saw this with the programme she did, just her and David Attenborough going through Buckingham Palace Gardens, and she had trees for every single event in her life, as well as wherever she goes to, you know, can you please plant this tree? And and she was saying, like, you know, if it is the pollution that's going to suffer, the more green space, the more trees we keep, because they're the lungs of the planet. Yes. She said, but then she turned to him and said, hopefully the grandchildren will be okay.
Yes, indeed, because it is our future generations that will be affected by what's going on with the environment. And
she's acutely aware of it. And it was so wonderful because this had been going on, and I hadn't heard about this until last year. This was her silent, and it turns out that, you know, I don't know if you may be too young to remember, but at one point when Prince Charles was younger, the press, particularly things like The Sun and things, would take the mickey out of him as a tree hugger.
Yes.
Because he'd been taught by Van der Post, who was a formidable, almost hermetic philosopher. But actually it turns out Charles got a visit of his mother. She, as a constitutional monarch, isn't allowed to say anything publicly or express any opinion in public. But he learned it of her, the caring of trees, and now we know that they're all at it. And so now Prince Harry is now taking the Queen's place to visit all the places where the trees are being done. It's all in parts of Africa, every single continent and things. So, you know, imagine if the UN got caught with the same thing, you know. So I'm not saying for a second that we are doing anything alone. It's just us. But I think we do have an important. Everybody who's into occult, esoteric, meditation work has a special contribution that they can give, that simply because of we have the skill set that other people don't, and we can change the fear contamination into a hope and a celebration and a joy and an expectation.
Well, thank you very much, David. That was a fantastic talk. Just one quick reminder, and they can find out about your course at
Hawkwood College. If you can bear with me for 10 seconds, I may even be able to give you their email.
There'll probably be a website or an email. Is great.
There might be one of those too, mightn't there?
I'm sure there is a website probably.
Yeah, it's just I'm not always very good at
because I've always been whenever I've had a garden, I've always left a little bit for what I would call nature.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I just have the email at the moment. Hawkwood. Oh, but I think that will probably be it. www. At is email, isn't it? www. Hawkwood College, all one word. .co.uk.
Super. As in .org or .uk? Uk, right. Okay, I'm sure people can just Google it and it'll come up as soon as they...
And you see it. It's a lovely, and they have got a lovely website, by the way. But it's a super place, and I just love going there and things.
And it's going to be a super course, and we need more of these kinds of courses. And hopefully it won't be the only one. Hopefully you'll do lots more.
Well, fortunately, they're already looking for a suitable place in America. I had wanted to do one in America this year as well, but I had to face facts of, which is what I touched on with you, is I can't go into a strange place and be expected to do this in a strange place. It has to be a place I've gone to before and have already made the communications with things, So, so that's why some of the Americans are coming to this one. But then they will then be on the lookout for some place in the States, that I can go to and do it and things, and so we can open it up there too.
And I suppose if anyone's listening to this and they lived in France or Germany or somewhere and they wanted to do something like this, they can contact you and perhaps have other discussions of starting it somewhere else in another country as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we can't sit on our bums.
And your website is risingphoenixfoundation.com?
No, ours is very quick. It's www. Then it's done by letters. R for Roger, P for Peter, X for xylophone, F for Freddy, .org. O-R-G.
Super. Thank you very much, David. That was a fantastic talk.
It's lovely as usual.